Hello, welcome back to Outbuilding in the Workshop series. Today I am going to show you, this is a frame that I built, and this frame is one of 4 that I'm going to use to make a table saw workstation. These frames are really great for workbench stations. They're also good for furniture, and just this notion of doing laminated plywood and joinery is going to be useful for a lot of things you do in woodworking. The first one I made here, I made a bunch of mistakes. I learned some things, and in the end it worked out fine. But I'm going to build 3 more in this video, and I'm going to show you all the things that I've done to improve my process. So stick with me, and I'll show you a way that I've come up with that allows me to build really precise ones. They're fun to put together, they go together really square, and they're super strong. Okay, so challenge number 1 is you've got a bunch of laminates and you're putting them together and you want them all to be, they're fairly long and you want them all to be lined up so that you get a smooth face on both sides of your laminate stack. And so the way I do that is to oversize them a little bit and then go back and cut them, and I'll show you how to do that. So to get started, I need to break down the 4x8 piece of plywood I've got. It's birch plywood, and I've got both 5x5 and 4x8 sheets, and the pieces I need, a couple of these are longer than 5 feet, so I'm going to use the 4x8s for this. To do that, I've used to do this through the table saw, and I had a real hard time getting good cuts, and that may have been partly how I was dulling my blade. So I'm switching to the track saw here, and I'm just cleaning up a spot, put down some cardboard to work on, and then have to shuffle all my material around. And you're probably used to this in your shop too. It just seems like you're always kind of moving around material. But I get it all sorted out and cut down the strips to the size I need. So with the strips cut out, and they're different thicknesses because the frames have different thicknesses around the frame, I take the appropriate ones and cut them down, and I'm giving myself about 1/8 of an inch extra so that when I glue them up and do things, I can trim them down to get the ends to match exactly. So to start with here, I just kind of rough them out, and then I'm going to put them in sort of a stack that is organized based on my drawing to look kind of like the laminate stack, just so I make sure I've got everything right. You can see I've got some marked spacer blocks that just help me set this up and lay everything out, so I'm sure I've got my laminate stack the way I need it to be. With everything laid out, then I can sort of dry stack the beam or the member the way I want it to be for the workbench, and make sure everything's going to work before I start to glue it. All right, so this beam is a pretty good example of some of the issues that you're going to run into if you do this. For an interior, basically a mortise like that, you're gonna have a hard time getting these 2 boards to line up really smoothly, even if you try to jam it together and sort of compress it all with clamps. It's just going to get unwieldy, especially if you're using clamps like these, which they're not the best for doing this kind of glue up, but they will work. And then I've got these spacer blocks that are in here, and I want to make sure that I want to get these to line up really clean, and on the ends, the interior ends up here really clean. And so the way to do that is to just glue these up first. And they're overcut, they're a little bit too long. So I'll glue up these two pieces here. I don't have to be quite so careful with that. I can just glue them up, let them glue. Then I'll cut them down to their true size in the chop saw. And I can get a really, really super smooth cut here that's completely square and rectangular and everything. Do the same thing here. Then I'll assemble the rest of it and give myself extra so that when I go to put these together on the end, I can cut the ends off and trim them up to be true as well. But to sort of start with, and I also don't have that many clamps, so I'll glue up these 2, take a quick break, and then come back and glue up the rest of it with the allowance for cutting things off after I've trimmed these up. So to glue these up, I just use every clamp I have, and I put down the glue, use a little silicone brush to spread it out evenly, put them together, and then just clamp them up. And these clamps are not perfect, so I have to reposition things to get them to work. And then once that's dry, I pull them out and I sand up the edge just to get any little glue residue that might block the fence and make it a less perfect cut. Sand that edge and then just drop it into the crosscut saw and just make my accurate cuts so that I've got nice smooth edges on both ends and that the interior pieces here are the exact dimension I want them. So then with those internal pieces all put together and trimmed up, I can go ahead and use my spacer blocks and accurately space off that interior piece and put in around the outer pieces and build up the rest of my framing member. And this goes pretty quickly. I just glue it together, clamp it up again, and this time I'm spending a little bit of attention to pressing those blocks and keeping them tight so that those interior spaces are the right gaps. So with that one set aside and drying, I just go ahead and start cutting up the next stack and repeat this process over and over again for each member of the frame. And I get it kind of into a rhythm once I started doing it and got the routine down. So that was all the innies, and now I'm doing the outies, which is the ones that have sort of a tenon or a tenon. And what I did is I had my gauge blocks that were really accurately cut, and I put them on and clamped them really tight on the end of the tenon or tenon so that it would kind of create a backstop for gluing the outer pieces on. And that worked really well, whether it was short and stubby like this or the big long ones. So I clamped those on first and then used that as a gauge stop or as a stop backer. And I just glued those up and clamped them up, and that held together pretty well and ended up resulting in a really good fit. All right, so I had the pieces that had sort of internal tabs, which are like these. Remember, I glued up these two first, then I cut this board down to the right dimension on the ends here and got that exactly right and square. Then I glued up the whole thing on the outside. When that was all done, then I ran them through and trimmed these down so that they're nice and smooth and they are to the right dimension. And the last thing I did was cut the ends of this based on my overall dimension and also looking at this gap. And so these two over here are done. They're the ones that have sort of mortises in them. And now I've got the ones that are sort of tenon based, and I've got a couple adjustments to make to these. First, I'm going to run them through and cut them down, true them up to their widths, and then I'll trim my ends of my tenons so that they are the right length and that the overall boards are the right length. And then I've got a couple other modifications to these before I can start dry fitting the whole frame together and put it together. And remember, this is the second of 4 frames. First frame, I gave myself sort of not a failing grade, but not the highest grade, just because I learned a lot of these things. This one seems to be going better, and I'll get this one done. We'll kind of look at it and see what it looks like. And then when I do the last 2, I'll see if there's other improvements I can make. But so far, these are coming together pretty well. So I'll trim these up. I add a little block behind here to reduce tear out. So now I've got all 5 of these trimmed up and ready to go. And I noticed one problem, and it's something I'll be able to fix, but one boo-boo, and that is these should be the same length, and I don't know which one of them's wrong. If this one's too short, then if it's too long, I can trim it down on the table saw. I'll have to add in a little block if that one's not, and I'll figure out why that was. I think it had to do with the different thicknesses of these pieces. But we'll go ahead and try to put this together and see how it goes. So this long one is the base, and I'm assuming this will fit together without any sanding, but if they may need a little bit of extra work to get them to go together. So this one should slide in here. And it does nicely, actually the other way around, because it's a different thickness. And that fits really nicely. That's just considerably better than what we had going on the first time around, which is exciting. And then this next one is a bit of a puzzle. if I got my dimensions right, this should slide through. And it's tight, it's close. That one might take a little bit of, just a tiny bit of massaging, but that's actually a good problem to have. So I will not force that one. And then this one should sit in here. And that looks really good. And then I've got one on the end that just is a standing upright, which I'm expecting will work just fine down here. That's good. These are fitting together really, really tightly and nice, so they'll clamp really well. This one should fit down in here. And that looks just about right. That's really good. I just need to clean up this. I think the thickness of the plywood is just slightly variable, so this one just needs a little bit of massage. I'll just sand it a little bit, see if I can get it to fit in there. And it looks like it's even the right dimension, so that's a good start. So maybe I'll get a B on this one, we'll see. And then I'll do another round for the other two frames and see if I can't improve on this a little bit. So one other quick remedy here. These were not quite the same length, and so one of them I had to actually cut. This one's cut correctly now, so the one on the longer one is cut correctly. The other one's too short, so I'm going to just glue in a little piece here, let it dry, and then I'll cut it down to match. And you probably never know that it was there. So next, these riser pieces have a little bit of inset, and they pick up the bench top up on top. And so this is just something I need to build and cut into it now. It's much easier to do now while these members are flat than when it's put all together. So I'll measure these out, rough them out, and then I'll show you how I use the router to sort of clean that up. So now I've got this, what amounts to being a giant dado on this side and another one on this side. And the one on this side, obviously I could just skip a layer and end up with a really smooth surface and get that right. This side I cut with the bandsaw and sort of roughed in. And so this is a jig I made, and all it really does is just kind of create a flat spot for the router, so I can line this thing up. One other little modification I needed to make was another dado on one of the rails that is going to pick up a sort of a bench top or a little counter that will hold the crosscut sled. linear actuators. So this is just something that, again, is easier to do now than when it's all put together. So I'm adjusting the router here, and I'm going to run it through. This was kind of interesting because I'm using the Oneida supercell, and that thing's got so much suction that with my fence here, it kind of actually draws the workpiece up against the fence really tight, and it's kind of hard to move it. And that was something I got used to. The little connector I have that I drop down here has a little throat on it that I could adjust, and I could open that up so that it kind of lets some air through and kind of reduce the suction a little bit, and that helped a lot on my second pass. And then finally, you know the expression, a round peg in a square hole. Well, it's a square hole I'm trying to make, and I'm using a round router bit. So I just used the little vibrating tool here to kind of cut out the corners. So it's sort of a poor man's chisel, but with plywood, it's a little bit easier. So I cleaned up the corners, and then I was done with that part. All right, so I think I've got everything done. I've got all the little grooves and the little things I need, and I'm just gonna do one more fit up just to make sure everything is where I want it to be before I glue. And I have these carcass spacers that I use when I'm building my boxes for my drawers. And so I'm gonna just put the carcass spacer and what will be sort of simulated door sides on there. And that fits really nicely. It's actually perfectly smooth. So that's gonna, the drawer carcass is gonna sit right in nicely here. I'll use that when I'm gluing up to sort of square up the upper part when I'm gluing the next leg in. But so far everything seems to be fitting together way better. I got my grooves up here on the top for the sides, and then this one is a little bit more complicated to go together just because of the it's like a bit of a puzzle, but all these are fitting together well now. There we go. So now there's a couple things I learned when I did this last. I didn't have clamps that were long enough to reach, and I can certainly reach this way, but on the long one I've got some new clamps I'm going to put together and use to do this. And mostly you just want to jam the joints together as tight as you can get them, and then you can sand the backs. Like I've got them, they're really super close, but a little bit of sanding will clean up what's left there. And it looks like my carcass spacer hopefully fits in here nice and snug. Want it to be tight, yeah, it's just right. It's snug, and that way I can build my drawers right inside this little space. So with everything test fitting well and the new clamps, I was able to glue it together. And having really square joints, having everything measured out really carefully makes putting this together really kind of fun because it drops right in. Everything comes in just square. I used my carcass spacers to ensure that I had the sort of parallel beams where the carcass is going to go. And it went together really quickly. And then the clamps are just a joy to work with. I've never used these, and I just picked them up, and they were kind of on a discount if you bought them as a kit with a bunch of them. So big expense, but something I'll definitely take advantage of over time. And they just work so much better than the little ones I was using. And so I was able to put this together and get it glued up and move on to the next frame. So with 2 frames down and sort of a pattern forming, I went ahead and did the last 2 frames off camera, and I'll just point out the things that worked differently or worked better on these last 2 frames. For one, the new clamps are so much better than the old ones, and so I was able to set these out and sort of gang glue all of the different interior pieces in batches, and that sped things up quite a bit. So I got those all glued up, did the same set of steps to glue, trim, and test fit everything and put together the frames. All right, well, these are going together really well, but I did run into one problem that actually happened on the long frames. There's 4 frames that make up the workbench. And I think I know what happened, and it's probably good to point out. I could hide this and not show you, but I think it's better to show you. I remember I was overcutting the lengths of things, and then I was putting them in, and I think in some case I picked a couple of these that I let run long. I kept that overcut in there, and so what I found when I went to assemble things is that these 2 notches should be square, and they're not. They're off by about 5 millimeters, and the other frame is sort of similar. So I think I fell into the same trap with both of them, and I guess it's just, I mean, there's a whole lot of pieces here, and I don't know what advice to give you in terms of how to fix that, other than just being super careful. So I can fix this pretty easily. I can use a saw to cut this down to the right dimension and then put it a little block. It'll be certainly super stable. And I can actually kind of correct and make sure that these are dead square, because as you'll see later, that'll keep everything rigid in the frame. But it's just something to note, and if I could go back and do it again, I'd probably make the same mistake, so you just have to be kind of careful. So to fix these offsets, I just set the track down, made sure it was square and measured out properly, and then just ran the saw through with the blade set to the thickness of one piece to extend that notch, and then I just cleaned up the bits after that. With that cleaned up, I went ahead and measured how thick I needed a piece to put in there to substitute, and I just looked at my end cuts out of the scrap heap and found one that was the right thickness, and went ahead and put it in there and glued it in, and then I can sand it down and trim it up after it dries up. So while those repairs dried, I went ahead and took the two frames that were complete and just test fit them. They were fitting pretty good. So then I threw them up on the bench and just sanded them, cleaned it up, got rid of any little excess glue that had squished out of the joints with a chisel, and got these two set up ready to go. And then I could focus on the other two as they finished up drying. Once those were dry, I cleaned up the extra piece of wood that I put in there and just sanded it down so that everything was smooth, checked the fit, and then went back to assembling the frames. And then test fit the last two junctions, and these are sort of a half lap joint that both sides have a notch, and so I had to kind of work on both sides to get them to just to ease in, but got them cleaned up, and that was one of those cases where the two different sizes of plywood sort of bit me, but it was easily remedied with some sanding. So it finally went together with a bit of fiddling and some sanding to get everything to work. I had two different kinds of plywood. I had some 4x8 sheets and some 5-foot by 5-foot sheets, and the thickness was just nominally different, but when you do stack ups and then try to put them together, they interfered a little bit, so there was a little bit of sanding to do, but that wasn't too bad, especially using the Rotex. I could sort of just quickly take it down. Cleaned them all up. I'm not going to glue this together. This is just dry fit, and it's actually super stable just because of the joinery, and that's really nice. But I've got it on a flat desk or flat table here. I can't even use my basement floor because it's not completely flat, and that's the whole point of this, is to get this thing really, really square and flat when I put it together so that I can build from there. It's like a foundation. A couple things I learned, the thickness of the plywood, if I could go back, I would make every frame out of one kind of that plywood or another and not mix them, although that wasn't a big deal. Overcutting and then trimming them down was a really big win, especially gluing up that interior piece. However, I did burn myself, as I pointed out, with kind of forgetting that I'd overcut a couple things and not trimming those down when I was assembling. So just thinking through your assembly and having really good drawings, that would help. But I was able to get away with that by putting in those little blocks and adjusting it. It was a lot of fun to put together. I appreciate you watching. If you want to see how this crazy looking shape is going to become a table saw that's going to be pretty capable, subscribe and check out the next episode or two of these. I'll put the legs on this, get this assembled, and then start migrating things up to that permanent island using this as the sort of first module of that. Anyway, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. And until I see you next, I'll be out building.